to celebrate the True Heinz Prize, and I think, kick us off.
Well, thank you, Ramona, for being with me here for this. And I want to thank Left Wing Books and the people at the University of Pittsburgh Press, and Drew Hines people. It's a real privilege to be here. So this story, like many of the stories in the collection, are about characters who are revisiting their past, trying to make sense of their past and see how things, that situations or relationships they had have impacted them in the future. So that's one of those stories. And it's the first story in the collection called A Place in the World, the title story. I was getting some sun during my lunch hour the day I met Fisher. We were in the middle of Central Park on the big green lawn called Sheep Meadow. It was a warm afternoon in late April, and the sky had the pale blue look of faded denim. The park was crowded. The previous winter had been stubborn and miserable, like a house guest who won't leave, so now everyone had been cheered by the nice spring weather. Wherever I glanced, New Yorkers were wearing expressions of gratitude and contentment. They didn't look like themselves at all. I was lying on the grass with my shirt off and my khakis rolled up above my calves. "Won't you get itchy like that?" said a voice to my right. I propped myself up on my elbow and shielded my eyes from the sun. The man who was talking to me was seated on a blanket a few feet away with a book in his hands. He had the round, plain face of a middle-aged infant and a look of weary politeness. All told, he was quite ordinary, like an extra in the crowd. "You think I'll get itchy?" I said, in the bored, mirroring tone I often used at bars when talking to men like this. "I mean to say I have a towel that you can use," he said. And with that, he produced and handed me one, which I took without even thanking him. I stood up and put the towel down on the ground and sprawled out on it. Then I waited for him to ask me some more questions, which I planned to disregard. It was a way to spend my lunch hour. But he didn't say anything. This annoyed me. I turned on my side, just showing my ass, and then stretched a bit and flexed my biceps. I was 24 at the time, at the peak of my stretching and flexing powers. I wasn't used to being ignored. When eventually I caught him looking over, he gave me a prim, embarrassed smile. You didn't see much prim in this city, not in my experience. I was intrigued. I thought about my friend Buzz. He would have called this an opportunity. I knew Buzz from one of my first temp jobs after I arrived in New York. We were in a word processing pool at a law firm where all the senior partners had the dead-eyed stares of serial killers, and the associates scampered around nervously like so many potential victims. Buzz was also my tour guide through the gay bars and clubs of the city. He was fun and campy and fond of using phrases like, "A boy's got to take care of himself," and "long live the checkbook romance." He was a living example of such things, and now he no longer needed to temp because he'd met a married doctor from Scarsdale who paid the rent on his little apartment near Sutton Place and gave him an allowance to buy ties and things at Bloomingdale's. Before Buzz met his doctor, we would go out to certain bars in the city that he would laughingly refer to as elephant graveyards because of the older, less desirable clientele. We let these old guys buy us some drinks, and then we'd sit back, aloof and sneering, like royalty from a small country, while the rest of the evening passed in a blur of unspoken negotiation and protracted tease. Buzz had actually met his doctor in one of these places, and I went home with a few guys in this fashion too, men who regarded me with the determination of hungry lizards until they'd get me to their apartments where they'd finally pounce, smothering me with their damp coughs and too much aftershave. As our hands traveled over me, I'd often will my mind to wander like a runaway pet. And sometimes I'd disconnect entirely from myself and have something that resembled an out-of-body experience. When I described all this to Buzz, he referred to the phenomenon as my fugue fucks. But other than being treated to a few expensive dinners or getting a knockoff Baume & Mercier watch, or going away for a Hamptons weekend with a burly banker who wanted me to put him in a headlock while he recited German poetry, nothing much ever came of these liaisons. "What are you reading?" I asked the man on the blanket. I was sitting up now. He looked at the cover of his book as if he needed a reminder, and then told me a title by Edith Wharton. I don't remember which one. He said he was writing an article about this book, comparing it with something by Henry James and focusing on modernism's relationship to realism, or something like that. I was concentrating on his jaunty little demeanor as he spoke, more than the actual words he was using. He looked like a happy cherub as he babbled on, but then after a while he wound down, and his face returned to its plain roundness, or round plainness. "I suppose this sounds very dull to you," he said sheepishly. I noticed he was blushing. "I guess I've heard duller things," I answered, in a tone that suggested that maybe I hadn't. When he laughed at that, it surprised me, not the least of all because I liked the sound of his laugh, a sort of joyful trilling I didn't expect. "I'm Fisher," he said, "Fisher Dunleavy." "Vincent Marshall," I said, pointing to my bare chest. Later, when we went out for the first time, Fisher would tell me that he was still in the grieving process. He lost his partner, Charles the Great, as I would come to think of him. When Fisher started to surface from that long hibernation that day in the park, I was the one who happened to be there with my clean-cut appearance and my wide, colorless grin, though my fresh-faced looks didn't exactly reflect my less than wholesome history. I suppose that was when the lies started and the omissions too. When he asked about my past, I made up a sunny childhood in a pretty little town by a slow-moving river, conjuring the life of a teenage jock, complete with baseball championships, broken fingers during football games, and winning baskets at the buzzer. I was tall, strong, and athletic, so at least I looked the part. Then, for sympathy, I stirred in some bigoted parents, bullying father, devout mother, who tossed their boy from the house when he came out to them at 18, scattering his clothes and possessions on the lawn like the aftermath of a boiler explosion. I knew Fisher would question me about my higher education. He taught English at City College, so of course it was going to come up. I told him I'd attended a tiny liberal arts school in northern Maine. It was a place I knew about because someone from one of my temp jobs had gone there and made jokes about how it was basically a summer camp where you could get a degree. Fisher had never heard of the place. I was self-deprecating about this college and the education that I faked got there. So later on, if I missed one of Fisher's quasi-intellectual references or at my grammar fair, I would blame it on my haphazard backwoods schooling. I threw in some standard descriptions of evergreens, lobster dinners, and Maine accents to give the account the proper New England ambiance, and left it at that. This seemed to satisfy him. It was an education, I explained to Fisher, that had been paid for with high-interest loans and odd jobs. Of course, if it were happening today, I would do better research with the help of the internet. I'd scan Wikipedia pages for more interesting and varied details. I might lie about a better school. Or maybe if I was meeting Fisher all over again, I wouldn't lie at all. It was certainly easier to tell Fisher I'd gotten a spotty education on a bucolic Maine campus than to admit that I'd never applied to colleges at all. Getting out my high school diploma had felt like the bittersweet end to a hostage crisis. I couldn't tell him what I'd really been up to for the 4 years after high school in Pennsylvania. There wasn't much of a positive spin I could have put on a depressed town I grew up in, or my half-dozen lost jobs in fast food joints, or my succession of drug-dealing boyfriends. And it wouldn't have been a happy choice to bring up my own brief dependency on painkillers either, which had been a fucking bitch to kill. I'd been arrested a couple of times too, for trespassing and disorderly conduct, doing some community research and had done community research and had my record expunged. At least I was able to recognize the dead-end quality of that life, its grim futility like fishing line tightening around my neck. When I got to New York City, I noticed there was plenty of futility here too, but it was gutted up like a drag queen with dirty glamour and street noise. I found temp work, but 2 years later, I was barely getting by. I lived in a small apartment in Alphabet City with two roommates. One guy danced nights in a cage at a leather bar in the meatpacking district, and the other was a grad student in anthropology at NYU. Our building had a blown apart look of collateral damage, and the walls of our apartment were grimy and pitted like the complexion of a grubby teenager. There were cockroaches in our cereal every morning, and we had a neighbor who shot off M80s in the middle of the night. I preserved a few of the details about the temping and the crummy apartment, though I turned my cage dancing roommate into a Canadian bartender. I told Fisher I was saving up so I could apply to law school so I could one day work on treaties for some international environmental concern. I'm not sure where I came up with that, but I revealed some volunteer work I hadn't really done for the Central Park Conservancy, though I had worn an orange vest for several months, picking up soda cans and used condoms from the edge of the road on Pennsylvania as part of my court-ordered community service. I sanitized my sexual history for Fisher too, inventing a winsome roommate from the college I never went to, who wreaked havoc with my heart, and a lacrosse player I rolled around with a few times. I professed an aversion to casual encounters, telling Fisher I was basically this rather bashful sort of person, despite my hunky and robust appearance. I didn't mention my larcenous ex-boyfriends back home or my safari work with Buzz at the bars or the jerk-off video that I'd done a few months earlier for some troll I met at an after-hours club, as I was short on rent money. It wasn't really so astonishing when I began to view Fisher as a potential antidote to my snake-bit existence. I figured if I could create a sweet winning image for myself, it would be better for everybody. From the beginning, Fisher wanted to see only the best of me anyway, like some indulgent grandmother in a storybook about naughty children. So I wove this earnest narrative into something modest and believable, and with the help of some bright smiles, cheerful moods, and my habitual gee whiz line readings, I became something to Fisher that I had never been with anyone else before. This was many years ago, back in the 80s. Thank you.
So I love that story so much. I know it was picked up by David Levitt and published in Zootropics, which I'm not surprised. Such a great story. One question I had for you is, so most of the stories take place in New York City, and there seem to be in a lot of the stories somebody who is trying their best to live an authentic life, and then somebody else, a character who's juxtaposed to them, who is someone who's not from the city, who didn't grow up in the city, maybe grew up somewhere else in the country, a small town, and they come in and they feel the need to invent a new self, I guess it is. And that difference between someone being true to themselves and sort of this false or fake personhood seems to drive a lot of attention in some of the stories. Did you think about that? And could you just talk about that?
Thank you for that question. That's a good question. I think that in some ways, yeah, many of the stories in the collection are set in New York. I think in a way you could almost say that New York functions as its own character in the collection. I think that New York, one of the things about New York and stories is that I think everything's magnified there, right? So it's you're having a lot more people there. It's you're on the subway, you're like crushed up against people. There's that old line about this 8 million stories in the naked city. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I feel that what happens in New York oftentimes, and a lot of people, it's a little bit of a cliche, but the idea that people feel like they can reinvent themselves in New York. And because I think people can reinvent themselves. But I think there is a sense that people want to come out in New York. People want to pursue a theatrical life, or people want to pursue a financial life in New York. There's a lot of reasons why people come to the city. And I think, but one of the things that you mentioned is accurate. Kind of as part of that, there's this incredible ambition and competition, I think, that happens in the city. And that provides these moments for people who sometimes fudge their narratives, like they want to be successful, or there's this idea of what success is, what the idea of failure is. And if you're having this many people in New York, if you got 8 million people in New York, you're going to have a higher percentage of success stories, but then you're going to have a higher percentage of failure stories, and you're going to have, and also just the struggle, I think, of being in the city. So I think for some of the characters, there is this sense that they are maybe not self-aware. So that's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of a false narrator thing going on there, or an unreliable narrator. But I think sometimes they're very aware that they're putting out a different narrative because they're wanting to see, that they're more of a success than they are. And I think that some of that drives the work in terms of what's happening. You kind of have a duality of how people, what the struggle is and certainly in city stories are about that. But I'm glad you mentioned Subtropics and David Levitt, because that was a really big deal to me, because David Levitt's one of my literary heroes. And I had been, I very clearly remember when his early short story collections came out, A Place I've Never Been, and Family Dancing, and then his novel Lost Language of Cranes. And I was a young guy. I think we're about the same age, but he was getting published, I think, at college and in the New Yorker. And I just really looked up to him so much. So many years later, I sent this story, through the slush file, through the submission, off to the submission portal to David Levitt at Subtropics, which is a fantastic magazine. Mm-hmm. And he answered me personally like 3 days later. And it was just a huge thrill for me, because I was like, David Levitt's actually writing to me. But he couldn't have been more kind. It's an incredible editorial experience. And he actually, the story went out with a different title. It went out with the title Out in the World. And one of the suggestions that David made was like, maybe you should switch that to A Place in the World. So the whole reason why the collection is called A Place in the World is because of David Levitt. So that's just, and I'm thankful and grateful for that. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you too, it seemed like it would have been kind of fun to write this character. You mentioned being an unreliable narrator. Did you have favorite characters that you wrote in the collection? I also wondered, was this always was this one of the first stories that you wrote for the collection, or did it just end up in the first spot? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a good question. I think that, I don't know if I'm going to misquote it, of course, and I'm not sure I'm talking about the right person, but it was either, I think it was William Maxwell, or maybe it was William Faulkner, who said something about how it's the writer's responsibility to kind of love the characters or love it. And I think that I feel that way. I really do care about the characters. It's a soft spot for any of the characters. These characters in particular in the story, yes, absolutely. I mean, I felt like I do care about them. It's really hard to choose from the collection. I mean, I felt a real affinity. There's a story in the collection called Off the Grid. The story of Katie and the character Katie was somebody that I really clicked with from the moment I started writing her, that I just really felt very close to. So I think about that. I kind of think about that character when I do some of the others, but I think I've got a soft spot for them. And then the next part of your question was about whether this story was one of the first ones. No, it actually, I have a couple of stories in the collection because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been writing and getting published for a long time that were written, first drafted. Because of course I continued to revise them over the years. But like 25 years ago, I wrote a couple of these first drafts for a couple of the stories in there. And A Place in the World was probably in the middle of a pack somewhere. It was published about 5 years ago or so. I've had some since then that we published and some before. But it's also one of the reasons why it's amazing what David Levitt does at Subtropics is he publishes long stories, and A Place in the World is an 11,000 word story. So it's a long one. And I kind of always knew that if I was going to have a collection, that would be the story I wanted to lead off with.
Yeah, I think he does a really good job of giving a reader any collection. So yeah, I really love that one. I also was really wowed by the way that you handle time. Often it seemed like you could move from the present to the past and back again quite seamlessly. And I mean, of course, the past is affecting your characters. I mean, I think actually that's something our books have in common. But what were you thinking when you were working with time, and what did you have an idea of what you were trying to achieve between the past and the present?
No, that's a really interesting question. Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I really don't know. I don't think it was intentional. I think that this is some of it's the way that I write. I do. But I should say, I had a rejection not even a week ago, and I would say it was almost an angry rejection, where the editor was like, "Why is this character rooted in the past? Move this character forward." So it was really this kind of feeling. So I'm not sure that always works for people, but I think that I feel like we all have these. The past is always with us, and we're trying to work through or navigate through the past. So for me, it feels like a natural way to go back. But oddly enough, when I was a little kid, and it was kind of weird, it was kind of like vaguely disturbing. I used to love to read obituaries, and I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I grew up in Boston, and I would read the Boston Globe, and the Boston Globe had these great obituaries, and you would see well-known people, and you'd see they went from here to here, and then they had a setback, and then they went from here to here, and then they had a triumph, and they would almost be. I looked at them even at the time as little short stories, and I feel like that was something that informed. I think when I started writing pretty early as well. That I would say that I think that like that kind of creepy kid who was reading obituaries kind of took from that the idea that you then go back and you go, oh, well, you did this and this and this, and that made you this, this and this. It's not like a trigger or anything. It's not like there's no magic to it. I think it comes out that way. I guess in some ways how I approach the past.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate those questions. That's right. I feel like the spotlight's been way too much on me right now. So I would love to have you read, because I love this collection so much. Everybody needs to get this collection. It's just beautiful and funny and heartbreaking and just wise and so many things. So I'd love you to read something.
Okay, great. And the spotlight cannot be too much on you right now. You are the 2025 Drew Hines winner. So thank you, University of Pittsburgh Press, for setting this up, and Leslie Green.
Oh yes, Leslie. Shout out to Leslie.
The Queen. So yes. So I'm going to read from a story called Aphrodite Reclining. This is written in the point of view of one of the peripheral characters. I think we've mentioned that my book of collection, my story collection is interconnected stories. The characters, when you meet them, they occur, and other stories. The two main characters are Babby and Donnie, who are both pretty much, I'd say, down on their luck for a lot of the collection. Um, and, the collection has a lot to do with class, and I would say they're definitely probably considered to be in the lower class by some people. But Babby is, her best friend is named Sammy Joe, and Sammy Joe's wife is from the affluent class of people in Mobile, Alabama, where the book is set and where I'm from. Um, and so I'm gonna read her story, or part of it. Uh, so Aphrodite Reclining, and this is set in 2006. The D'Iberville Country Club was too grandiose for a baby shower. Never mind, they had painted over the plantation white exterior years ago with coffee-stained beige. Inside, the vestiges of old Mobile remained in paintings of grand white houses, pink clumps of Alabama shrubs, and fountains aged the perfect patina. The paintings offered no hint of the slightly noxious smell of boiling cabbage that had once spewed from the paper mill near the bay. Such odors would never have reached the club, especially in the spring when a wall of azaleas guarded the grounds and made beauty the price of admission. Corinne stood on the club's portico to avoid the pre-shower bustle inside. 3 painted iron benches, there only for show, left her no alternative but to lean against a pale Doric column by the club's entrance. Comfort had never been a priority at the club, although it was adding a meditation garden. For this purpose, 2 heaps of crushed white granite pimpled the blacktop parking lot. As far as Corinne was concerned, the club was wasting money on a passing New Age fad. She would always prefer the tennis courts, bounded by ambitious jasmine, the pool where she had spent summers dunking her brother, and even gardening the shed where she and her teenage friends had smoked Virginia Slims. They probably drank too. One of the oversized doors to the club opened. The protruding glove of Sammy Joe's stomach appeared, brightened by a pink and white maternity dress that made her look proper, as though she belonged at the club. Your mom wants to know where to set the flowers, Sammy Joe said and drew closer. You're better with those things, Corinne answered. Her partner was no interior designer, but she was good at organizing. Yeah, but she won't listen to me. Corinne gently squeezed Sammy Joe's elbow, but only for the time it took a pall of leaves to scatter in the late March wind. Her mother did not listen to many people and would never listen to Sammy Joe. Corinne felt the urge to soothe her in a more substantial way, but kissing her, even circumspectly on the cheek, was not appropriate at the club. At one point, Corinne and her mother agreed. Displaying too much emotion made a mess of things, especially in public. You got dust or something on your jacket, Sammy Joe said. Corinne twisted the tail around and swiped at the white smear the length of a dollar bill, perhaps residue from a recent whitewash or dust from the pile of rocks set aside for the meditation garden. Let me try, Sammy Joe offered. No, I've got it. Sammy Joe sighed and retreated. That morning, Corinne had interviewed the 4th possible nanny. The interviewee had folded her stubby hands into her lap and said she believed in walking in other shoes, but wasn't rightly sure about walking in Corinne and Sammy Joe's. None of the other candidates had taken issue with them. It was, after all, the 21st century. But one had twitched her lips oddly during the interview, one had used the bathroom without washing her hands, and another had not shown up at all. With Sammy Joe certain to give birth any day now, Corinne worried that she would not find a suitable match. Nobody but you cares about a nanny, Sammy Joe told her that morning, and your family won't like you a bit better for it. Corinne swiped again at the white dust on her jacket. Are we still in agreement about asking Babby to take the job? Corinne thought it might be nice for Sammy Joe's best friend to be around their house more often. She was a good 9 or 10 years older than either of them, but a little life experience wasn't a bad thing. Sammy Joe reached between her breasts, pulled out a peppermint, and unwrapped it. She chewed them in lieu of smoking, but hiding them in her bra was tacky. When Corinne had expressed as much, Sammy Joe had immediately plucked a mint from her bra, unwrapped it, and popped it into her mouth. Asking Babby to work for us feels weird, Sammy Joe said, especially as a nanny. I think daycare is fine. It's what normal people do, you know? They had discussed daycare dozens of times. Corinne could not toss her child into a sandbox of strange, germ-infested children, but saying so only made her sound pretentious. Her own nanny, a straight-backed woman with a penchant for Mahalia Jackson and Sly and the Family Stone, had taught Corinne what her parents in St. Francis Episcopal could not: how to lie on the grass and smell spring, how to spread peanut butter evenly on bread, how to dance like she meant it, and most importantly, how to live among people who could never quite see you. Corinne believed her own mother had understood her shortcomings well enough to hire a nanny, which in itself had been an act of love. Neither of her parents had exhibited much in the way of daily affection during her childhood, but honestly, the idea of her mother warming milk and reading a bedtime story seemed as preposterous as world peace. Although Corinne believed herself far more affectionate than either of her parents, she saw that a nanny could give her child what she could not: the experience of another world. Do whatever you want, Sammy Joe said. Don't tell Babby it was my idea. From the club's entrance, Prue leaned out in a sleeveless baby blue dress and bordered along the hem. Mother's going to lose it if you don't come inside. Her sister was probably right. And I'll just
I love this story. And one of the things that happens in this story, so much is going on. Like the whole collection piece, because you're doing there's heartbreaking aspects in this piece. There's really funny aspects in this piece, and I think your use of humor is amazing. The idea too, and you also do a great thing with just brief sketches in this particular story. We'll just start with this story where it's all the way through the collection, where you have descriptions that are just like a knockout. Like you're talking about Marty's boyfriend, the Billy Goat-faced boyfriend. You've got these great moments. So there's a moment where Corinne is talking about Sammy Joe's father, and Sammy Joe's father is somebody who's has a relationship with him. She's trying to imagine her own father being as kind as what Sammy Joe's father has been, and she's like, I can't do that because that's not one of my fantasy's not one of my strong suits or whatever. I mean, it's such great moments where you describe a character in it's really hard to do. In just a few sentences, you get everybody, you can picture them, so you picture a lot of this. But one of the things that I'm noticing, and it especially works in this particular story because it's at the country club, so you have the haves and the have-nots. And one of the things that's so remarkable about the collection is the handling of community. And I think it's a complicated community, and I think that you have issues of race, you have issues of class, you have issues of identity, and you really handle it beautifully, really honestly, very, it's incredibly authentic. So I wanted you to speak a little bit about what that was like. Was that intention that you're going to be working within? You wanted people to think of this. You're balancing a lot of characters, just like I said, in a wonderful way. Was that something that was your intention to have this be a collection, and they are interlinked stories of community? And what was it like to kind of write very honestly about a complicated community? You could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And that first part, thank you as well. And if you could come sit with me while I write at my desk, that would be awesome. But yeah, so I started writing this in a class when I was studying fiction, creative writing out at New Mexico State. And in the class, we were actually reading interconnected story collections. So we read, Mystical Chronicles by Sarah Sherman Byam. We read Olive Kitteridge, Elizabeth Strout. We read Sherwood Anderson, Winesburg, Ohio. And those last two in particular really had a big impact on me. And I thought, I wonder if I could do something similar to what is being done in Maine and Olive Kitteridge or in Winesburg, Ohio. I wonder if I could do that with Mobile. Because really there was an exploration of community there, especially in Winesburg. So yeah, I think once I started writing it, I always knew I was going to be working with community. I hoped it would lean more toward a novel, but I don't think it quite got there because it doesn't have the sort of propulsive arc of a novel in certain ways. But
I disagree with you because I think it works in so many different ways. It's absolutely brilliant, these interlinked stories, but I think it does take great to it as well. But But
Yeah, but maybe that's, maybe that's the beauty though of interconnected story collections though, is, I mean, that's why I love them, is that you do get some of those niceties of the novel, but you also get the short stories that they stand alone and you can read one and, you don't have to read them all, but hopefully people do read all of their stories in these books, but yeah, I did really want to explore community, and I think an interconnected short story collection in a way is a great way to do that, because typically in just one short story you don't have a lot of characters. So being able to introduce them and then have them show up again later, but it's still a short story that stands. It's pretty great in a way.
No,
So.
I mean, and you did it so flawlessly, and I think that, and something you also do, like I said, the minor characters, or not the point of view characters, are so fully fleshed out in these stories as well. It's amazing. But one of the things you say kind of brings me to my next question, which is, you mentioned that the use of time in my stories. I mean, you do this, similarly too, right? And I don't think, spoiler alert, that each of the stories is a different year. And I think we go from, although we bounce around with it, but from like 1984 to 2018. And I think that's, so what you do with it, you're jumping right into those dates and explaining who these characters are. Was just in awe of it, because I think it's a lot harder to do that than the stuff that I do. But did you have a spreadsheet? Did you have notes? Did you know, oh, this is where Babby is in this point, and picturing them that way? I mean, I think almost from a technical standpoint, I'm really interested in how you accomplish that, because it is seamless. And what you also do, just in terms of the details, it feels very lived in. So you believe the character who maybe we see in 1984, and then we see them again in 2015. You believe this whole lived in thing happened, which is, I think, an extraordinarily hard thing to do. And I was just impressed with it. I mean, how did you keep track of them in your head, or did you have a journal? How did you do that?
I didn't have a spreadsheet. I don't think I don't like, I'm not friendly with spreadsheets actually, but it was not easy. I figured out a few things, at least that worked for me, in putting together a collection like that. One was that the spaces between the stories, because they were interconnected, mattered. Because I realized those are places where, there are obviously all of these characters and all these things that could happen in their lives. And things are happening in those spaces, and that's where readers get to think about, okay, between this story and this story, what might have happened, and they get to sort of, do your own adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking about those as part of the structure, so in some ways, I guess the absence as well as what was actually on the page, which helped me a lot with time. But yeah, like with your stories, I was very much wanting the characters to come across. These characters are really, they're present, but they're also living in their past. There's a lot of that going on, and including in this place in which they're living, in this city. All of that is sort of happening. So it was honestly, it was just a lot of revision. I'm not brilliant. It was just.
Well, then you're brilliant at revision, because honestly, it's brilliant. The final product is what counts, and it's amazing. It's so great.
Well, right back at you. So, yeah. So I don't know what kind of time we have here.
Well, I did want to ask maybe one more question, just because I'm always so interested in process with other writers and how they. I don't necessarily like to talk about it myself, but I'd love to hear other people. Do you have to have a certain? I mean, is there a special time of day that you write? Do you write every day? Do you listen to music when you write? Do you read other people during the days that you write? Is there a particular process that works for you that, or is it just kind of a random series of events that you're able to kind of have a great day of writing, and then, or do you have to kind of have things prepared in some type of way? And also with notes, I guess, and things like that. How much research do you do? And maybe kind of describe, like, what would be your perfect writing day in terms of how the process works.
Yeah, I don't know. My perfect writing day would probably be, I have at least a solid block of like 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours to sit down and really, dive into something. But that's not usually the case. So I wrote this book, and as I was telling you before this started, a novel pretty much working full time. And I know that you work full time as well. And, so you do what you can. I have been a morning writer, but I think that's starting to change possibly into maybe an afternoon. I don't know. But I try and write every day. That doesn't always happen. Yeah, I do know that when I start cleaning and organizing things, that I'm about to sit down and really get going because like everything starts. It's like my wife. Why are you throwing things out? What's going on? Yeah, this is the book is in my head or in my head.
That's really funny. Yeah, because I have a weird thing where I used to do this. I don't do it as much now, but I would just have to have everything like cleaned up. Like I have to have the house clean before I could sit down. And I did a lot of my work at like 3 a.m, so I'd be like running around at midnight getting the house cleaned up, and then I'd sit down. Very strange. It was just but anyway. But
so when did you write? So I'm curious. When did you write your stories, or when do you write your?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most of these stories in this collection, I wrote in the middle of the night. I'm like literally. Some of them were started many years ago when I was raising my son. So as a parent, you try to find time whenever you can. I think it's probably common for a lot of us. Like a lot of writers, you just do it when you can. So in my time just happened to be like 3 a.m, and I was lucky because I didn't really require a tremendous amount of sleep. So then I would like get a few hours maybe and a couple hours, and then I would be up again to go to work. And then I would do some editing on the subway. And so in that case, and I still do some late nights with work. I mean, I try to say that I write every day, but some of that writing is editing or reading through something. It's not necessarily new work, but it's like I'm somehow doing something in the way. But this is, but Ramona, thank you so much. This has been a really lovely chance to talk about the book.
Yeah, and I don't know if there are any questions online or here.
No questions.
All right. Well, thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you. I really
Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having us here.
And thank
Love
you
Fan
to
Books and for everybody for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.